Hello and welcome to the HR Like a Boss podcast. I'm your host, John Bernatovich. I have embarked on a journey to get to know amazingly awesome HR and business professionals with the hope to find out what it takes to do HR like a boss. If you enjoy the show, please make sure that you subscribe and hit that 5-star rating. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Like a Boss podcast. I'm your host, John Bernatovich. I know I always say this. I'm super excited to have the guest, but I really am this time. And not that I am not for the previous guests I've had on the show, but I've known Maria, our guest, Maria Gaeta, our guest on the HR Like a podcast for a fairly long time in my career. She's been a total sweetheart, wickedly smart, super passionate about human resources. And I thought, gosh, you're long overdue to be on the HR Like a Boss podcast. So Maria, welcome.
You, John. I appreciate that very much.
How would you describe the purpose of human resources?
It's a great question, and I love that question. I think, quite frankly, the purpose is to be both human and a resource. And what's most important about that is to really be partners with your constituents, your stakeholders, because in the end, it's all about the people. And that's what's most important. You really have to be cognizant of that. So it's not necessarily all about support. It is to a point, but it's also about pulling all of those puzzle pieces together for the whole of the organization. Kind of like planting a garden in a way, right? You don't just plant it and say, oh, okay, go ahead, go grow. I want those flowers, those vegetables. You might have to do different things for vegetables versus different flowers, maybe less sun, more nutrients, maybe additional watering in some areas. So you have to be very, very aware of what you're doing. And that takes a lot of listening. And that's the purpose of HR, in my opinion. It's a human and a resource really diving into creating success and a win-win-win. A win for the people, a win for the organization, and ultimately a win for all stakeholders.
So we oftentimes run into this conflict around win-win-win. And I think we're really into it right now with this idea of fully on-site work, 100% remote, virtual, hybrid, somewhere in between. So how are you creating that win-win-win in this very unique climate that we have post-COVID and where people are actually physically doing their work?
That is really challenging. I will say, like you said, post-COVID, like who would have thought that we would be here today in the space that we're in and what's happening around us? So I will say, ideally, I think what works for the people and for the organization. However, it does tie closely to relationships and that garden that I mentioned earlier, meaning you have to really be very diligent and deliberate. If you are in a hybrid situation, it's a little easier because there's some in-person and FaceTime, and you run into somebody and you have a little water cooler or coffee break talk, and that develops those relationships. When you're fully remote, you need to be a bit more deliberate about those relationships and having one-on-ones like this, face to face, where the camera is on and you can see someone's reaction, response, gauge and understand where they are coming from. That ties a lot to the engagement piece that we're going to talk about, I believe. But I think it's important to make sure that it is well received and that you understand the other person's perspective. Now, I think that it's very important to look at what are the business needs and how do we get things done successfully, whether it's hybrid, whether it's in person, whether it's remote. But there's all different challenges with all three scenarios, quite frankly, in my opinion.
What are your recommendations when you have an employee who's frustrated, disgruntled? Hey, I thought it was going to be this way. Let's just say I was going to be 100% remote. Now you're asking me to be on site hybrid. Doesn't work for me. My family arrangement, different than what you described. Like what's the best way for you to navigate through those challenging situations when you're managing to different constituents, the employee, the employer, your leadership team?
Well, it's important to get it straight from the onset, meaning I wouldn't want to sell somebody on, oh, it's 100% remote, no doubt about it. There's no no worries there, and then have them come in and change that situation. So we need to have and bridge that gap, an agreement to bridge the gap that says this person is requiring this, and get the leadership involved to understand the why. If they understand the why and this person has knowledge, skills, and abilities that truly match what we're looking for, and it can be that win-win, does it matter? Maybe it does. If it does, then explain the why. Well, here, you may need to be on site quarterly for a team meeting to go over a product line, or a meeting with the customers, or a team meeting internally. Would that work for you? But be very understanding, but also explain again what the purpose is, not just to say, I want people in the office, or we want to all be 100% remote, but it's really managing that process, whether it's remote, hybrid, or in the office, it's managing that. Because think about, I hate to say it, it's like the old days, even though it's not that old, everyone was pretty much in an office, in their manufacturing facility, in whatever, at their client site, whatever, your industry is. And there was no question typically about what was going to happen. You were going to go to work for a certain amount of days or weeks, or maybe you're traveling or what have you. And that whole process has changed. However, those of us who have been doing this for a while, the adjustment might be a little easier than someone who maybe isn't, because you do run into different people who prefer to just be at home, working from home and working remote. Some positions lend themselves to that type of remote situation better than others. And again, explaining that why really makes all the difference in the world. And if someone is truly passionate about it, I think they'll understand, yes, I can be remote as long as I'm getting my work done. But guess what? Then your leader or manager really has to make sure that you're both on the same page as far as what does that look like? What goals and KPIs do you need to meet to be successful?
Maria, how would you describe someone that does HR like a boss?
I think it ties very closely to what we've talked about, being very deliberate, being an active listener, understanding others. But I also think that it ties extremely closely to your book. In the area, I believe it's chapter 4, what does a boss care about? And expand your thinking. If we aren't focused on what does whatever, put anything you want in there, the CEO, the CFO, the customer of this new big product line that we're making, what do they care about? And expand your thinking. Like I said earlier, this is not an event, it's a process as well. So you better really think about expanding your thinking and study your company, whether it's your company, whether it's a division, whether it's a new business line or a new entity, whatever it is, understand it well. And in HR, that's what we really need to do as an HR boss, is to really bridge that together with all of our stakeholders, our leaders, to help pull all of that together. That's what's really important. I always say HR is not like the police. If you're the police, you have another problem, in my opinion. I call it flexible boundaries by which you really make decisions that the organization truly cares about, and that's understanding the company and everyone involved in that organization.
Maria, great job. I loved having
Thank
you
you
on the HR Like a Boss podcast. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much also, John. You're the boss, the HR boss. Love your book. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out the HR Like a Boss podcast. If it resonates with you, please leave a rating and review, or better yet, subscribe and share with a friend. Until next time, let's continue to aspire to do amazingly awesome HR.